sharing his presentation on all our screens. And Muchiri, you can take it away from there.
All right, thank you very much. As you've heard, my name is Muchiri Nyaggah. I have, sorry, 1 second. I am struggling with something here that I clicked and now I'm lost. All right. So I'll be talking about the work we've been doing on open data for agriculture and a whole lot of what we see as an opportunity for open data in terms of supporting Africa's agriculture agenda. This webinar is being recorded, so you can look out for it on our YouTube channel at some point later. And on our YouTube channel, you'll be able to find a recording of this webinar for future reference in case you want to share it with anyone or if you want to go back to it for whatever reason. So if you don't mind, I'll go straight to it. I'll take you back a number of years to 2014. The African heads of state and government gathered in Malabo for the Africa Union Heads of State and Government Summit. And the summit is like the highest organ of the African Union. Decisions are passed there that are implemented by member states, and it's a fairly serious space. And the 2014 summit was happening at a time when Africa was really struggling to feed itself, to close the food sufficiency, food deficiency gap. In 20 years, coming up to 2013, the year before, Africa had only managed to do 8% in terms of its growth in making progress towards food sufficiency. And the population was growing much faster than we could produce food. This was setting ourselves up for a major crisis. And the heads of state recognized this. And so at the summit, among the many things they discussed, of course, was the issue of agriculture and ending hunger, and exactly what an agenda for Africa should look like. There was already a declaration that had been made in Mozambique more than 10 years earlier in Maputo. But the number of countries that were participating and trying to make progress on this, which was the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, were not that many. So this was an opportunity for African heads of state and government to do something for our people. And they did. They came up with the Malabo Declaration. And it's a long document. We'll share it after this in case you are unable to find it online. But one of the things that they say is that, recognizing the dire situations that obtain with regard to Africa's capacity to generate, analyze, and manage data and information to facilitate evidence-based policy development and tracking of progress of implementation, and hence affirming our commitment to enhance such a capacity. This was a sentence that is essentially speaking to the fact that African countries were unable to find the data they needed to make evidence-informed decisions about agriculture in Africa. And this was identified as a major problem and needed to be addressed. So because of the context of this webinar, which is more on the data side, I shall focus on that. I shall focus on the data and the evidence side of the declaration and what it means for Africa if we have that data available in the open. The declaration, beyond going into the initial setup sections, it talks about the things that the African governments are recognizing and the things that they are reaffirming themselves to, goes on to set up these 7 commitments that every country is committing to work towards. The first commitment has to do with reaffirming and recommitting themselves to the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, which takes you back to the Maputo Declaration of 2003. You have within the 7 commitments and what we eventually call the CAADP results framework, a further unpacking of that into 23 performance categories. Now, this is not in the document that was in the declaration. These were developed as a result of the declaration, and they are considered what we call the CAADP results framework, Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program results framework. It covers 2015 to 2025, and takes these 7 commitments that heads of state made that cover everything from committing to CAADP, to ending hunger, to having the number of people living in poverty, tripling intra-African trade, all these things, and turns them into these 23 performance categories, and then creates 43 indicators for measuring progress on how we are doing with this agenda. I'd like to point out just a couple of things that that are in the Malabo Declaration, in which your governments are working on and are committed to. And one is this issue of commitment to the CAADP principles. The document says that we recommit to the key principles and values that define the CAADP process, which include, among others, there were a number, and 1C of that is the application of principles of evidence-based planning, policy efficiency, dialogue, review, and accountability that's shared by all NEPAD programs. This simply means that African governments were going to take the guesswork out of creating interventions to deal with hunger and poverty and inequality in Africa by taking an evidence-based approach. Show me the evidence, show me the data, show me the information that you're using to make these decisions, and I will. And essentially that is what the commitment to the CAADP principles, this specific principle is about. Later on in the document, it talks about the closing. This was for me an interesting thing, because you see, we say in Africa that we have a lot of good policies, a lot of good programs, but we struggle with the implementation. And I think this Article 9E is a part of the document that speaks to this, because the government, the presidents, the prime minister, the heads of state and government essentially said, this is not about making commitments on paper. This is about turning commitments into results. And for that, everyone is needed. So this was not just something that was done for the heads of state in Malabo to rub shoulders with each other, say very smart sounding things, and then walk away. This was something that we all have a part to play. As you can see, it talks about farmers, pastoralists, fishers, private sector operators, agriculture, business, etc., and calls upon us to rally behind the realization of the provisions of this declaration. And that is what I believe we are called to do, and that's what we need to do in Africa, not just for data's sake, because we can't eat data. The whole point is that we are helping evidence-informed decisions to be possible by putting the kind of evidence that is needed in the hands of those who need it most, so that we can address hunger, address poverty, address inequality, address some of the big issues around resilience and trade that we've been unable to crack because of the challenge of evidence and data. So the 2018 summit presented the opportunity for the what we call the biannual review. Part of the commitment that was made at the summit, at the Malabo Declaration during the summit, was that countries will have a mechanism to report back on how they are doing on implementation of that declaration. And what you're seeing on the screen now is essentially a continental scorecard. Every country is supposed to have a score with a maximum of 10. As far as the design of the entire process was concerned, at this point, based on 2017 data, which is the year when the data was collected for presentation to the 2018 General Assembly, 3.9 is where a country should be to be considered on track. And as you can see, there's a lot of red over here. Quite a number of countries were not on track, a very large number of countries. What was even more disappointing was if you took all these countries and did a continental average, Africa was at 3.6, meaning as Africa, we were not on track to achieving food sufficiency, to reducing hunger. We were not on track to addressing issues of women and youth in agriculture and agribusiness. We still have a long way to go. There are also a number of countries there that did not report for a number of reasons. Some like Somalia and Libya, we understand these are countries in fragile and conflict-affected situations. And others, it might be an opportunity for us to push back and put pressure on our governments if you're from the Comoros, from Eritrea, from Guinea, to ask our governments to step up and be accountable on what they are doing to achieve the objectives of the declaration. So I'll try and be really quick, because I'd really like to hear your thoughts on a lot of what we're talking about today. But the biannual review report, which was the report that was presented to the African heads of state and government in 2018, is a data-heavy product. Contains data gathered and submitted by member states, provided to the regional economic blocks, which are your East African Community, your SADC, your UAM, ECOWAS, and then transmitted onward to the AUC for the summit. And the document was put together not just as a report, but also with actionable recommendations. And there are 6 recommendations in particular that I usually pay a lot of attention to. But today we shall look at just 2 of those. Number 3, the third recommendation, is for member states to mobilize adequate technical and human resources for comprehensive assessment of existing data management capacities. Mobilize adequate. Many times in government, you hear people and the civil service talking about the fact that they don't have enough. They don't have enough people. They don't have enough money. They don't have enough equipment. They're not able to get their job done because they don't have enough of whatever it is. And what we're saying, what the heads of government here were saying that, especially once they adopted the report, the biannual review report, is that member states should mobilize adequate technical and human resources to deal with the issue of data for agriculture. And then there was this very long sentence. I'm sure our English teachers would be very disappointed when they see the long sentences we put out. But it says, for the AUC, the African Union Commission, to work closely with member states, etc., but to mobilize the required support to strengthen mutual accountability, agricultural data systems, knowledge management, and to institutionalize the biannual review mechanisms and the African Agricultural Transformation Scorecard to ensure peer learning and scaling up of our agricultural transformation. This long sentence just means that we are that the African Union Commission is supposed to work closely with everybody to make sure that we are mobilizing everything we need to do so that we are accountable, so that our systems work, so that we know what's working, have our knowledge, and so that we can learn from each other. And all this in aid of the things that we set out to do, which will address the issues of hunger, poverty, inequality in Africa. And that's a very important, in my view, a very important recommendation of the biannual review report. We shall share this report as well, and you can look through it and find your country and see how your country scored in the various issues. And then you can also see the things that the authors of the scorecard called upon maybe your specific government, your country to address as a matter of urgency. And that brings me to who we are and why this matters so much to me, and why my colleagues and I, lose some sleep. At the Local Development Research Institute, we see ourselves as existing to support agricultural transformation in Africa because of the ambition to use an agriculture-led approach to ending poverty, hunger, and inequality in Africa. We see this issue of data for agriculture as being very, very key to our national context. There are 3 things that we see when we start talking about these issues around open data, around data for development, around big data. And these 3 things here essentially cover that. One is the issue of human capital. If you're going to talk about capacities for data management in Africa, a good number of those capacities are human capacities. Do people know what to do with data? Do they have the skills? Are they constantly learning and being exposed to new information so that they can get better at it on any given day? You have the enabling environment for that. Do we have the equipment? Do we have the policy and the legislation that makes it possible for people to get their jobs done and to do that using data? Do we have the financing for it? All these things are really part of that. So we set out on a study to try and establish this. looking at 152 data sets that are used for those for 5 of the commitments, which represents 37 indicators. And we looked at 4 countries, and our question was initially just to find out one thing: how much of the data used for making decisions on agricultural policy in Africa and reporting to the African Union level are available to us as citizens, to us as regular folk, not people like us who don't have access to a government office and can walk in and plug a flash disk into any computer and get the data we want. How much of that data can we find? And we did this strictly looking at data published by national governments on government websites. I want you to understand that our governments provide a lot of data to the World Bank. They provide a lot of data to the FAO. They provide a lot of data to the United Nations, especially around the high-level political forum and reporting on progress on the SDGs. But our question was, how much of that data are they providing to us as citizens, the ones they have a duty to report to? Accountability really should be to us before multilateral and intergovernmental and bilateral agencies. So that's the approach we took with it. So we're very strict about it. This has to be data that's available on national government websites. And so a team from LDRI, went through government websites for 4 countries and looked at whether the data was there, what format it is in, whether it is open in terms of having permission to use, reuse, and share. And I will present to you just very quickly the two countries that we found for the 4. The first is Kenya, that I will talk about. Unfortunately, I'm not talking about them in order of performance. The truth is that Kenya ranked number 4 out of the 4 in terms of making that data available online. 50% was found. We estimate about the number of agencies that should have been publishing data, only about 38% of them were making that data available. If you look at those 7 commitments in terms of the themes, there's no theme that had all the data needed. And if you look at the 37 indicators, only 13 had all the data available. And this just shows you how thin data is. But again, 50%, you might think that's not too bad. Quite frankly, I think some of us expected this to be much worse. Uganda was the best performing of the 4 countries. 66% of the data was found online. Again, around the same number of agencies in government, 38. But we had, the same figure of 0. 0 of those commitments were covered in terms of complete coverage, in terms of open data available. 15 indicators. So Uganda did better. So for these countries, then how are we supposed to inform policy dialogue? How are we supposed to review progress if we don't have the access to the data to be able to do that? Because if I give you a score of 3.7 for your country, how do you know what that means? How do you unpack that further to understand what it means in terms of number of young people who do not have access to opportunities in the agriculture sector? How do we come up with interventions that aim to address those gaps if we do not have access to that information? The Kadett principles envision the creation of a rich engagement between governments and civil society and intergovernmental and development partners to make faster progress than we did in the 20 years preceding 2013. So that we're not still middling at 8% or 6% in terms of our growth for agriculture, but we're doing way better. We're accelerating towards 2025. I don't believe it's possible to do that if the data, first of all, is not available for those who need to use it for decision making. And I don't think it would be possible if the accountability around it is not there. And we're currently seeing it now, for instance, with expenditures in agriculture. One of the commitments is for countries to ramp up their investment in agriculture to 10% of budget. But we need to know, what does that 10% look like? Where is it? It's not just crops. Sometimes it's infrastructure. Sometimes it's energy. Sometimes it's in social protection. But where is that money being put? How is that investment looking? And what is it resulting in terms of real impact? that data, unfortunately, is not very available, and we need to do something about that urgently. Now, of course, some of you, and I've seen some of your names, you've joined the call. You've worked in open data for a long time, and you're very familiar with the FAIR principles. That data should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So what we looked at across 4 countries is somewhere on the order of about 360, 365 pieces of data. And the truth is, 0% is open. 0% would be considered to comply with the FAIR principles, and this is in my opinion an unfortunate position for our 4 countries to be in. Our study is progressing to 4 more countries now. By the end of next week, we'll have an updated report that covers a total of 8 countries. And I'm hoping that the other 4 countries will have a few countries at least that will help our 0% look a bit better. But this shows you the gravity of the situation when it comes to open data for agriculture in Africa, and the extent of work that and effort that we have to put in order to fix this going forward. So the commitment, the Malabo Declaration calls for us to rally behind the realizations of the provisions of this declaration. So let's rally. Let's not sit back and complain about the lack of open data. Let's do something about it. Let's go out, let's go knock on doors. Let's have conversations with our ministers for agriculture. The process for the 2020 biannual review report has begun. So countries are going to start data collection in April. There's going to be a process of consultations. There's going to be a process of validation. A report is going to be provided to ECOWAS and to EAC and to SADC and to UAM. This process is going to take months. And that's a good thing for us because it gives each one of us an opportunity to figure out and to find out from your governments, who's playing a leading role, who's convening, so that you can get involved and start bringing these issues of opening up of that data to the fore. I'd like to see in 2020, when the report is published for the biennial review, that first of all, more data is available. Countries have performed better in terms of the actual realization of the declaration, but also that the amount of data that is open and adhering to the FAIR principles goes beyond 0%. We have to do better. So part of our call to action is that we've now decided one of the things at least we're going to contribute to this effort is the convening of what we're calling agriculture open data working groups. So in a number of countries, in 8 countries across Africa, we'll be convening this national level working groups, which is open data champions and experts and agriculture champions and experts and people who are very familiar with public policy and agriculture and statistics and data, to have conversations about how to change the state of play. This is starting in April, and we see this as not a very large group of people at the country level, but a small group of people who can get together and collaborate and partner with the government, with development partners, to make sure that the amount of data that is going to start being collected now, those 150 plus data sets that respond to theme 2 to theme 6 of the declaration, that those ones are also put out in the open, adhering to the FAIR principles in a way that people can find them, use them, reuse them, analyze them, and use them for their own decision making. So starting in April, we'll be doing that. My colleague Lynette is helping with this. So if you'd like to get involved in the working group, in your country working group, please drop Lynette an email at her email on the screen. And I'm sure we'll be delighted to have you as part of that community, dealing with this issue of the data systems, the data gaps, the quality gaps that are currently causing us a few problems. Among these countries, Rwanda was the top performing country in the biennial review in 2018. And I'm not talking about just in terms of providing data and whatnot. Rwanda was top performing in the progress it has made in implementation of the Malabo Declaration. The number of people coming out of poverty, the number of people who are affected by hunger, dealing with traffic and trade, and all these things. In terms of the entire 7 commitment framework, Rwanda is the best performing country, but then also the best performing country in making data available. So we need to see, how we can all catch up to Rwanda, but also for Rwandans, how they can make sure that we don't catch up with them. We need to keep our game on fire. We need to be excited and working towards this. So I think I will stop there, and I'd like to invite some questions in case you have any. Let me know what you think, Lynette. Maybe I can hand this back over to you. Hello, can you hear me? Lynette, you're muted.
Okay, I'm here now. I think there was there's a little hitch because all my mics were muted. But thank you so much, Muchiri, for that amazing presentation on the Malabo Declaration and how far we are, and how open data, in essence, can help us get to that conversation. So before you can start posting your questions into the chat if you have any questions. There's a bit of background noise in individual microphones, so it would be better to post them in the chat just so that we can hear each other, okay? But if you really want to ask a question and you want to speak, kindly go ahead. But I'm going to start this off by 2 or 3 questions that had been sent earlier by people who had signed up to the chat. So Muchiri, one of these actually was raised by my colleague, and he was asking whether the low score by countries on the biannual report, whether you think this could have been contributed to by the lack of data. Is this valid? Do you think this is like something that, are we getting low scores because countries don't have data to actually show that they have made progress on certain issues?
Actually, my feeling is that is possible. In recent consultations with people who've been working on this for a while, the sense has been that there are countries that could have done better in terms of talking about how far they've gone if they had the data to support their claims. So definitely. Access to data definitely, in my view, affected the ability of some countries, to rank a certain way. But secondly, it's also a sign of the challenge of coordination in countries. Our governments have a lot of data. It's a huge amount of data that sits within government departments. The problem is government doesn't know what government knows. And that is why one of the things that you'll see in the commitments is for knowledge management, because the coordination between Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Water and Ministry responsible for Women and Youth, the Ministry responsible for Labor, the Ministry responsible for Finance and Planning, all of these parts of government have to talk. They are all doing something related to the delivery on the agricultural transformation agenda. So if there isn't good coordination, then the people in government who are responsible for putting together the report will not be able to access the data, and then you'll have a scenario where your country looks like it's not performing, or you're not making progress on ending hunger. But in actual fact, what you're not making progress in is in talking to each other within government. So there's a challenge of coordination, but also a part of it which is a challenge of origination of data.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that, Muchiri. So a few other people, I don't know whether they're able to join us, but they had sent initial questions. And one that was repeated and that I would like to bring up was the question of where is the place of the smallholder farmer in all this, and how is open data useful to them, especially with the age-old issue of when you talk about open data, it's data online on a website. but the smallholder farmer is not very able to sort of access that data if it's, you know, temperature data, rainfall data, weather patterns data. So what really is the place of the smallholder farmer in this whole conversation, if you're talking about the Malabo Declaration?
A good part of the interventions that will be done to address issues around hunger and poverty are going to happen at the grassroots. They're going to happen where most of Africa's agriculture happens, which is at the smallholder level. So the role here is for intermediaries to play their part. There is a very, in Africa, we are blessed with a very young population. So in terms of people who understand how to use technology to develop solutions that can be delivered in terms of information, actionable information to a smallholder farmer, delivering that via text message, delivering that via YouTube content. I mean, I know that's also online, but we're seeing a lot of content that leaves YouTube and makes it into WhatsApp and then ends up on SD cards and is distributed offline. There are people who are doing this for distribution of entertainment content. I think that tells me it's possible to do that for agricultural extension information. It's possible to do that for agricultural markets and input price information. So the opportunity for us is to close that gap between the smallholder farmer and the higher end open data infrastructure, where specialists who understand how to open an Excel spreadsheet are operating. And I think the intermediaries there have a very big role to play. And I think this include media. There are some examples where that is happening really well, including in Tanzania, with one of the newspaper companies there doing a pull-out that happens once a week, which was eventually picked up also by Kenya. The Nation Media Group in Kenya does that as well. I think it's called Seeds of Gold. And you'll find a number of those kinds of interventions happening. So there are opportunities for smallholder farmers to get access to data that is made open, but the opening up of the data has to be in parallel with the building of capacity and raising of awareness for the intermediaries to take that data and turn it into edible things, bits of content or bits of information that can be used by a smallholder farmer to get their job done. Make sense? Can you still hear me? Okay, okay, sorry, 1 second. Lynette is having some trouble with her mic. So I'll stop my screen sharing for a second and deal with this whole unmuting business. Apparently, it's happening easier on my end. So while we're getting Lynette's mic back online, someone's asked a question about the strategies that we should adopt to integrate government in the Africa Open Data Network project. I think the opportunities are, first of all, when we are having the conversations on setting up the working groups to make sure that government is very, very present. And for this, one of the things that we're doing is we're going to collaborate with partners such as GODAN and the regional strategic analysis and knowledge support system, RESAX, which has a very strong relationship with government and specifically mandated by the African Union to provide strategic analysis for implementation of the protocol. And we see the country level working groups for open data for agriculture being co-convened with some of these institutions of government and other stakeholders. So that's one strategy that we are using to make sure that government is on board. Lynette, you're back.
Yes, I'm back now. Sorry, I think that's the Zoom automatically mutes all other mics when the host is speaking. Sorry about that. So thanks for that. So I have a few more questions, but I can see a few more questions coming in the chat. So I guess we're going to go to them. But before that, when I posted the link to join the country working groups, a few people were asking how to join and why not other countries. So the countries that we have posted, they are the countries in which we are having working groups, are the countries in which we are doing the research on the Malabo Open Data Report. So these are the only countries where we will be having working groups at the moment. But the intention is to widen our scope as we move forward with our research on the Malabo Open Data Report that we're doing. The link is there if you want to sign up to join a working group in those countries that we have given. That is Kenya, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Ghana, Zambia, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda. So Muchiri, the next question by Angelica, I hope I said that correctly, is how can the telephone apps showing up in different countries tackle the issue of, I think, lack of open data? And the last part, she says, as I see a commercial data, as she sees commercial data a commercial data market rising.
I think the telephone-based applications, and then a whole number of them, some that are on mobile apps, some of which are SMS-driven. They respond to the needs of farmers based on their national peculiarities, national context. So it's not always going to be possible to pick up one service and implement it in a different country because of cultural changes, because of infrastructure, education, all these things. So I think it's down to design and specifically identifying which problem that we want to tackle. So if you have in your country the problem being that people don't have access to weather data, because I mean weather data is a very big thing in agriculture, and if they had that data, they'd be able to make sense of it. Then maybe some of those apps could still be useful in putting that that information out on SMS for farmers who are offline. But then also connecting that with other offline strategies. There's an example of a project that where they print out the weather information and post it on notice boards that are in public areas, like in the local market. And people coming to the local markets to buy veggies can see what the weather forecast looks like for the next 5 days or whatever it is. And that's for me an example of at some point data that originated online but made its way down using offline channels. And telephone apps, telephone-based applications, mobile phone applications can play a role there in terms of closing the gap between the notice board and the more sophisticated big data type of things that we find online. The commercial data market is always going to be there, and it's only getting stronger. And there's still an opportunity there for people who are working with open data, because you need to remember one thing about the definition for open data. It is unrestricted. So it is data that you can use, reuse, repurpose, redistribute without restriction or with very minimal restrictions. So it's possible for you to use open data to build a commercial business that provides data. Of course, the commercial value of your data would be that you added something to it, that you took open data, were able to combine it with other data, which is where the interoperability issue comes in, and create a new product, a new valuable output. So there is opportunities there for people to make revenue. I'd point you to a company called Grow Intelligence that are a very good example of this. That have a platform that they sell that you have to pay a subscription for. They have very rich data, very rich analysis, and people pay to use it because of the level of value addition they've done to that. So that would be my take on that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Muchiri. So there's another question, I think, from AODN, and the question is there a plan for all countries in Africa involved in the agreement to make
Yes, for us, I think Lynette mentioned just now that even as we talk about our working groups happening only in 8 countries, it's just because of our own limitations as a small action-oriented think tank based in Nairobi. Our dream was to do this in 55 countries across Africa, but we are limited by resources. We are limited by
Muchiri, I think we lost you there for a minute. I don't know if you could hear us. Okay, I don't know whether he's having a problem with his connection, but oh, are you back?
Yeah, sorry about that. Something happened with my connection.
Okay, go ahead then.
Yeah, so I was saying that the challenge we have is just has to do with the resources that we have available to us. Otherwise, we'll do all 55 countries in terms of making available these projects to more than just our initial set of 8 countries. But in terms of open data for agriculture, this is, first of all, at the level of the Malabo Declaration, all African governments are on board. So your government is already working on putting together its report to the African Union in January. So that is already happening. There is another declaration that's called the Nairobi Declaration that was adopted by a small handful of countries in 2017. A few other countries have since shown interest, but this one's on open data for agriculture, and it was facilitated by Gordon at a ministerial conference that was hosted in Nairobi in 2017. One of the things we could see as a strategy in terms of getting more of our African countries involved is to go back to them, with the Nairobi Declaration and with the Malabo Declaration and say, this is what we should be doing. We should be adhering to the CAADP principles that this government committed itself to in 2014. And this is one way to do it, which is putting out all this data in the open in this way, in ways that are aligned with the FAIR principles. And I think we will not have trouble, getting this message across to our ministers and to our permanent secretaries, principal secretaries in government, because this is not something new. This is something that they're already committed to, that they're already doing. They just need to do a better job at it.
Great, thank you for that. So there's, I think, 2 comments. Monday, I think, says, I have worked and published in agriculture. I believe in open data and to encourage local research, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, which is what we're doing. And we hope you can also share with us whatever initiatives you're working on across the continent. And Hillary also says we should promote agribusiness incubations in institutions of learning if we're to fully involve everyone in agriculture, especially here on our African continent. And that's interesting to say because we're working on another research project currently on data for development in Africa. And we're trying to look at the place of academia and academic institutions in the whole data for development conversation. So I think it's really interesting that you would point that out, Hillary. Monday, I have seen your question on acquiring meteorological data in Nigeria. And I had seen this question earlier. I don't know if anyone in the group has, in the call has suggestions for where to get meteorological data in Nigeria. So I looked this up and I wasn't able to find anything, but what I found was the Trans-African Hydrometeorological Observatory, which could be useful for you Monday. So you could send them a message and tell them what data you need, and they could possibly help you if they have it. But this also goes on to just stress the lack of data. So if you go to the Nigerian National Statistics Office website, this data is not there. And on the meteorological website, I think the last publication is in 2012 or something. So this really speaks to the gaps in terms of data, agricultural data. If we can't get this data at the national level, then we cannot really implement anything with correct evidence. What is informing how we're implementing whatever we're implementing?
Yeah, absolutely. And Lina just pointed out one other thing. Together with a number of partners, Gordon, through a program called Gordon Action, ran, I think it's probably in its final year now, an effort to address data in 3 areas. Land was a big part of that, but weather weather data was also a considerable part of that. So if you go to the Gordon website, I'm sure you'll find some resources that were published as a result of that level of work. And there are a lot of people, for instance, the University of Wageningen in the Netherlands, they have a very strong presence and capacity around this. You can also check out cta.int. I think that's the right domain. They provide support to a lot of our governments across Africa and also in the Caribbean on agriculture and rural transformation. And they have also been very strong in supporting a lot of this work around open data and capacity building, especially related to weather and land and things like that. So you could check those out as well for additional information. The issue of universities being places where we can incubate agribusiness, I think is something that in Africa we're not taking enough advantage of. I think the lessons from the US and from Europe on how this can happen are being lost on us. We need to really take advantage of this to do that. I think that Hilary, you're right. It's an imperative in my view to promote agribusiness incubation in universities. And I think in Kenya, I've had some of this happen at a very low level, but I think there are a number of other universities in Africa that have been attempting this. So if in your country you're aware of a university that's incubating agribusiness startups or innovations, please share with us. You can send us an email. We'll share with the rest of the group because I think there's a lot of peer learning that can happen when it comes to that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Muchiri. Monday, there's another suggestion for you to check out NIMET. So thank you so much to Adiogun, I hope I said that correctly, for that suggestion. And if you have any other suggestions, feel free to post them in the chat. Thank you so much for that. This is a very difficult name for me to pronounce, but I'm going to try. Oluwanishola, I hope I said that correctly. You make a good point about not being able to find data on agriculture on our country's website, and you have to go to USDA to find it. So this was also observation when we were carrying out research on the Gender Open Data Report, that the data is not on the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics website, but you find it with UN Women or whoever. So the push is really to get our governments to publish this data at the national level so that we're able to access it. I think we're getting to the end of this. And Muchiri, one last question that was sent in was, there was something on implementation of the FAIR principles of open data and the Malabo Declaration, and I think you have spoken to that. The other question, and the last question for me, was a question about, can subnational governments go ahead and receive and implement open data initiatives even when national governments do not make an obvious commitment to open data?
My answer is absolutely. In fact, in my view, some of the most useful open data on anything is probably that which comes from subnational governments, because they're responding much closer to the ground and can provide data that their people need more than anyone else. If you live in a place where the predominant activities are around livestock, for instance, and the national government has a very big effort because of donor money or because of whatever on fisheries, and there's a lot of fisheries data online and crops data online being published by your government. Your subnational government, where you're big on livestock, could actually give out that kind of data in a way that makes more sense to you. But even in other countries at a more generic open data level, we've seen that with Nigeria. Kaduna has had an open data initiative for quite a while. Edo State, I think, has also had an open data initiative. And this is when the federal government didn't have anything happening. South Africa has a couple of cities with fairly strong, vibrant open data communities and projects, but at the national level, there's nothing comparable. So yes, a sub-national government, and I would encourage sub-national governments to do this, should really consider open data as one of the ways that they can engage with their citizens to improve service delivery, to improve accountability, to bring innovation into their context in ways that might not be possible at the national level.
Great, thank you so much. I think we have come to the end of this. I see a comment from Hillary. I'm just going to read that as we come to the end. So Hillary says, more research is needed to promote organic agriculture. This can only be built basing on historical research, since in the past our grandparents were using natural pesticides from neem trees and tobacco, and they were working. Nowadays, pests are becoming resistant, and remember, like food stuff from Uganda found in supermarkets in Europe are very expensive because they know we practice organic farming. And he does make a good point about borrowing from, knowledge that is there in the past that was proved to be working, and not totally abandoning it, but putting it together with what we have now. So thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar. We are very grateful that you took time, and I hope it was useful to you. We will circulate a recording of the webinar either tomorrow or Monday. You'll get that in your emails if you registered for the webinar on the link. We'll share this with you. And just a reminder, the Africa Open Data Network has a webinar every last Wednesday of the month. Today is an odd day. We're doing it on Thursday because we had other meetings scheduled yesterday, but the webinar happens every last Wednesday of the month. We usually look at very different themes on open data on the African continent. So if you can join us for the next webinar, and if possible, all the rest to the end of the year, please check out our website. You'll find all the information there, and we will always post the details of the next webinar on our website. So also thank you so much to Muchiri for agreeing to present, and thank you so much for responding to all our questions. I guess that's a good point to end it. Thank you so much again for making time to join us, and we hope you can join us for the next one.
I had a blast. Thank you, everyone, and hope to see you next month.